Honey, not everyone is meant for college. There's no shame in that. My 11th grade biology teacher said that to me in an empty classroom that smelled like formaldehyde and dry erase markers, while 23 of my classmates ate lunch on the other side of the wall without any idea that my future was being folded in half and placed in a drawer marked "not enough." 14 years later, her daughter was sitting in my lab, wearing a badge with my company's name on it, and the emergency contact line on her application read, "Mrs. Patricia Coleman." Mother, what do you do with a moment like that? I'll tell you what I did. I gave her daughter the chance her mother never gave me. My name is Zora Achebe. I'm 31 years old. I run a biomedical research company called Helion Biosciences, headquartered in Durham, North Carolina, in a 22,000 square foot facility on Fayetteville Street that I designed from the ground up. We develop synthetic tissue scaffolds for regenerative medicine, which is a complicated way of saying we build structures that help the human body repair itself. Burn victims, joint degradation, organ damage. The scaffolds we create give cells a framework to rebuild on the way a trellis gives a vine something to climb. We hold 12 patents. We employ 34 people. Last year, we closed a $67 million Series B funding round led by a venture capital firm out of Boston that had previously backed 3 companies that went on to IPO. I have a PhD in biomedical engineering from Duke University. I published my first peer-reviewed paper at 24. I was awarded the NIH Director's New Innovator Award at 28, a grant given to exceptionally creative early career researchers. My name has been in Nature, Science, and the MIT Technology Review. And in 11th grade, my biology teacher told me I wasn't college material. Let me go back. Because the lab and the patents and the $67 million didn't come from nowhere. They came from a very specific place, a town, a classroom, a sentence spoken by a woman who had no idea what she was setting in motion. I grew up in Kinston, North Carolina. Population 19,000 and shrinking. It's the kind of town where the high school football schedule is printed in the newspaper and people still call each other by their parents' names. Oh, you're Benny Achebe's girl. That's how they knew me. My father, Benny, was a machinist at a fabrication shop on Highway 70. My mother, Adiz, was a home health aide who worked 12-hour shifts caring for elderly patients across Lenoir County. They were Nigerian immigrants. They'd come to the U.S. in 1988 through my father's cousin who'd settled in Goldsboro and worked at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. They chose Kinston because the rent was cheap and the people were kind, and my father believed, with the unshakable faith of someone who had crossed an ocean for a better life, that America would reward hard work. He was right, mostly. He worked hard. My mother worked harder. They never missed rent. They never missed church. They sent money back to family in Lagos every month, even when there wasn't much left. They raised me and my younger brother, Emeka, in a 2-bedroom house on Atkins Street with a screened porch that leaned slightly to the right and a backyard where my mother grew tomatoes and peppers in the summer. The house smelled like sea spice and palm oil and the lavender fabric softener my mother used on everything because she said it made America smell gentler. I was a good student, not the best. Not the kind of student whose name the principal knew. I was quiet. I sat in the middle of the classroom because the front felt too exposed and the back felt too far away. I did my homework. I studied for tests. I made B's in most things and A's in science. Always A's in science. Biology, chemistry, earth science, whatever they offered, I took it and I understood it in a way I didn't understand history or English or algebra. Science made sense to me. It had rules that were consistent. It had questions that could be tested. And it had a quality that I didn't have a word for at the time, but now I'd call integrity. The answer didn't change based on who was asking. The data was the data. In 11th grade, I was in Mrs. Coleman's AP Biology class. Patricia Coleman. She was in her mid-40s, been teaching at Kinston High for 18 years. She had a PhD herself, or at least that's what people said. I later found out it was a master's degree in biology education from East Carolina University, which is a respectable degree, but the PhD rumor had never been corrected, and Mrs. Coleman had never gone out of her way to fix it. She was the kind of teacher who was beloved by a certain type of student, the confident ones, the kids who raised their hands fast, who debated loudly, who treated the classroom like a stage. She rewarded performance, participation, volume. I was none of those things. I was the girl who wrote meticulous lab reports, who stayed after class to clean up the dissection trays because nobody else would, who read the textbook chapters ahead of time, not because I was a teacher's pet, but because I genuinely wanted to know what came next. I understood the material deeply. I just didn't perform it. Mrs. Coleman didn't see me. Not really. She saw a quiet girl with immigrant parents who made decent grades but didn't sparkle the way her favorites did. She saw someone who wouldn't challenge her, wouldn't impress her, and wouldn't embarrass her. I was invisible in the safest possible way. Until the college recommendation letters. In the fall of 11th grade, we were told to start thinking about college applications. The guidance counselor, Mr. Royce, a tired man with a mustache that looked like it predated the building, handed out a packet of forms. One of them was a teacher recommendation request. I needed 2 letters. I asked my chemistry teacher, Mrs. Whitfield, who agreed immediately. For my second letter, I chose Mrs. Coleman because she taught the subject I loved most, and I naively believed that someone who taught biology would recognize a student who loved biology. I asked her after class on a Tuesday in October. The room was empty. The other students had filed out to lunch. The formaldehyde smell from the morning's frog dissection still hung in the air, sharp and chemical, mixing with the dry erase marker smell that never fully left that room. The fluorescent lights buzzed the way they always did, that low-frequency hum that you stop noticing until the room goes quiet, and suddenly it's the only sound. Mrs. Coleman, I said, I'm applying to some universities for next year, and I was wondering if you'd write me a recommendation letter. She was erasing the whiteboard. She stopped mid-stroke, turned around, looked at me with an expression I'd later identify as discomfort. The look someone gets when they're about to say something they've rehearsed in their head, but hoped they'd never have to deliver out loud.
Zora, she said.
Sit down for a minute. I sat. She pulled a chair from a desk and sat across from me. Close. Too close. The way adults sit when they're about to tell you something they think is for your own good. Honey, I'm going to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty.
She paused.
Folded her hands. Not everyone is meant for college. And there's no shame in that. College isn't the only path. There are trade schools, certifications, good jobs that don't require a degree. And sometimes, the kindest thing a teacher can do is be realistic about a student's prospects. I stared at her. My mouth was slightly open. I could feel the vinyl seat of the chair through my jeans. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Somewhere in the hallway, someone slammed a locker. You're a nice girl, Zora. You work hard. But AP Biology is a college-level course, and your performance, while adequate, isn't what admissions committees at competitive schools are looking for. Your test scores are average. Your participation is minimal. I just don't want you to set yourself up for disappointment. She said it gently. That's the part that makes it worse. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't cruel in the way that's easy to identify and reject.
She was soft,
measured, caring even. She genuinely believed she was helping me. And that made the damage deeper, because when cruelty wears the mask of kindness, you don't have permission to be angry. You just sit there and absorb it and wonder if maybe she's right.
So no, she said.
I don't think I can write you a strong recommendation. I wouldn't be doing you a favor. I nodded. I picked up my backpack. I walked out of the room. I drove home in my mother's 2003 Toyota Camry, the one with the cracked dashboard and the air freshener shaped like a pine tree that had stopped smelling like anything months ago. I walked into the house. My mother was at work. Emeka was at a friend's house. The house was quiet. I went to my room, closed the door, and cried for 2 hours. Not the dramatic, movie-style crying. The kind where you lie on your bed and stare at the ceiling and the tears just come, steady and silent, like something leaking from a pipe you can't find. When my mother came home at 7:30 that night, her scrubs smelling like Bengay and hand sanitizer, she found me in the kitchen making rice. She could tell something was wrong. Mothers always can. I told her what Mrs. Coleman said. My mother listened. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she turned off the stove, sat down at the kitchen table, and said something in Igbo that roughly translates to, The person who tells you the road is closed has never seen you walk through walls. Then she said in English, "You are applying to every school on your list, and you're going to get in. And you're going to prove that woman wrong every single day for the rest of your life. Not for her. For you." I applied to 9 schools. I got into 5. One of them was North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, which has one of the strongest STEM programs among HBCUs in the country. Their biology department was small but serious, staffed by professors who'd done research at NIH, CDC, and some of the best medical schools in the Southeast. I went there. It was 3 hours from Kinston, close enough to visit home on weekends, far enough to feel like leaving. College was the first time in my life I felt seen in a classroom. Not because the classes were easier. They weren't. Organic chemistry nearly broke me. I got a 47 on my first exam and sat on a bench outside the science building staring at the grade like it was a sentence. But the difference was the environment. The professors expected me to succeed. Not hoped. Expected. Dr. Muriel Baptiste, my organic chemistry professor, a Haitian-American woman who wore statement earrings and could explain electron orbitals in a way that made you feel like the universe was on your side, held office hours every Tuesday and Thursday. I went to every single one. By the final exam, I had an A-. Dr. Baptiste wrote on my paper, "I knew you had this. You just needed someone to not look away." That sentence became my operating principle. I majored in biology. I graduated in 3.5 years with a 3.78 GPA. I applied to Duke University's Biomedical Engineering PhD program, one of the top programs in the world. I was accepted with a full fellowship that covered tuition, a living stipend, and research funding. When the acceptance email came, I was sitting in my mother's kitchen in Kinston. She read it over my shoulder and didn't say a word. She just put her hand on my head the way she used to when I was small and held it there. I moved to Durham in 2017 into a graduate student apartment on Irwin Road that was the size of a parking space and smelled like mildew and ambition, and I began the work that would define my life. The first year of a PhD is humbling in a way nobody prepares you for. You arrive thinking you're smart. You leave the first semester knowing you're the least knowledgeable person in every room. The other students in my cohort had gone to Stanford, MIT, Georgia Tech. They'd done undergraduate research at labs with budgets larger than Kinston's annual municipal revenue. They used acronyms I'd never heard and cited papers I hadn't read and debated methodologies over lunch at a Chipotle on 9th Street with the casual confidence of people who'd always been told they belonged. I didn't speak much that first year. Not because I didn't understand. Because the instinct to be quiet, the instinct Mrs. Coleman had mistaken for incapability, was still in me. It took 2 semesters and a conversation with my advisor, Dr. Franklin Yao, to change that. Dr. Yao was a 63-year-old Taiwanese-American tissue engineer who had been at Duke since 1998 and had a reputation for being both brilliant and impossible to please. He spoke slowly. He never raised his voice. And he had a way of asking questions that made you realize your own answer before you finished the sentence. In February of my first year, after a lab meeting where I'd sat silently for 90 minutes while 4 other students debated scaffold architecture, he asked me to stay behind. "Zora," he said, "you had something to say in that meeting." I wasn't sure it was worth saying. It was. Because you were right, and they were wrong. The cross-linking density they're proposing won't hold under physiological conditions. You knew that. I could see it on your face.
How?
Because you're the only person in my lab who actually reads the papers I assign, cover to cover, including the supplementary materials. He paused. Stop being quiet. The world doesn't need more quiet scientists. It needs accurate ones. That conversation rewired something in me. Not overnight, but gradually. I started speaking in lab meetings. I started presenting at departmental seminars. I started writing not just lab reports, but papers. Real papers. My first peer-reviewed publication came at 24, a study on how mechanical stress affects scaffold degradation rates. It was published in Biomaterials, a top-tier journal. Dr. Yao told me it was acceptable, which in his vocabulary was the equivalent of a standing ovation. My PhD research focused on decellularized extracellular matrices, which is a mouthful that essentially means I studied how to strip living tissue down to its structural framework and use that framework as a scaffold for growing new tissue. Imagine removing all the bricks from a building but leaving the steel frame intact, and then using that frame to build something new. That's what I was doing, except with collagen and glycosaminoglycans instead of steel, and with human cells instead of bricks. The application was regenerative medicine, helping bodies heal from damage that would otherwise be permanent. The lab became my home. Not metaphorically, literally. I spent more hours in that building than in my apartment. I'd arrive at 7 a.m. and leave at 11 p.m. and eat lunch standing up at a bench because sitting down meant losing momentum. The lab smelled like ethanol and the faint sweetness of cell culture media and the particular sterile nothing smell of a biosafety cabinet running at full flow. I loved it. Every part of it. The precision, the patience, the slow, meticulous accumulation of data that, over months and years, began to form a picture of something that might actually work. I defended my dissertation in 2021. My committee was 5 people. Dr. Yao chaired it. The defense lasted 3 hours. When it was over, Dr. Yao shook my hand and said it was the strongest defense he'd reviewed in a decade. The other committee members nodded. One of them, a visiting professor from MIT, asked me what I planned to do next. I said, start a company. She raised an eyebrow. Dr. Yao did not. He just nodded, the way he always did when he already knew the answer. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying on a bed in Kinston, staring at a ceiling, 10 years earlier. The tears I had left were for different things now. After graduation, I had offers from 3 pharmaceutical companies and a postdoc position at Johns Hopkins. The pharma offers were lucrative. One of them, from a company in New Jersey, came with a signing bonus that was more than my parents had earned in a combined year. The Johns Hopkins position was prestigious, the kind of line on a CV that opens every door that follows. My mother wanted me to take the safe money. My father said nothing, which was his way of saying he trusted me. Emeka, who was by then studying computer science at NC State, texted me a link to an article about a biotech founder who'd turned a university research project into a billion-dollar company. He didn't add a message. He didn't need to. I turned them all down. Instead, I took a $50,000 grant from the North Carolina Biotechnology Center and a $100,000 investment from Dr. Yao himself, who wrote the check without hesitation and said, "This is not a favor. This is a bet. And I don't make bets I expect to lose." I started Helion Biosciences in a rented lab space in the Durham Innovation District. The name came from Helios, the Greek sun god, because our scaffolds were designed to give damaged tissue a new beginning. A sunrise after destruction. I liked the poetry of it. My mother said it sounded like a car brand. I used it anyway. The first year was brutal. The lab was 900 square feet, sharing a hallway with a company that made CBD dog treats and a guy who claimed to be developing a blockchain for farmers. Neither of them lasted 6 months. I did. The lab smelled like ethanol and the faint sweetness of cell culture media. I ran experiments 14 hours a day. I wrote grant proposals at night, sitting at a desk I'd bought from a Habitat for Humanity restore in Chapel Hill for $35. I lived on rice and beans and the free coffee from the co-working space downstairs that tasted like it had been brewed during the Obama administration and never refreshed. I hired my first employee, a research technician named Kwame, who'd just finished his master's at NC Central and who accepted the job knowing that the company had exactly one product, no revenue, and a founder who sometimes slept on the lab couch because the drive home felt like wasted time. By 2023, we had our first 3 patents. By 2024, we had 12. The technology worked. Not theoretically. Clinically. We'd completed successful preclinical trials showing that our scaffolds accelerated tissue regeneration by 340% compared to conventional methods. The data was published. The scientific community noticed. The investors noticed. The $67 million Series B round closed in February 2025. I was 31 years old, and the company I'd built from a $50,000 grant in a shared hallway was now valued at $210 million. I didn't send Mrs. Coleman a press release. I didn't post about it on Facebook where she might see it. I didn't do anything. Because the work was never about her. It was about the cells under the microscope and the patients who would someday benefit from what we built. She was a footnote. An old wound that had healed over so thoroughly that I sometimes went months without thinking about her. Until June of last year. Our summer internship program is competitive. We take 6 students each year from universities across the Southeast. Biochemistry, bioengineering, molecular biology, the kind of students who've spent their undergraduate years doing research and are trying to decide between grad school and industry. My operations director, a woman named Portia Crane who runs the internship program with the efficiency of someone who once managed clinical trials for Pfizer, handles the selection process. She narrows the applicant pool from about 200 down to 20, conducts interviews, checks references, and then presents me with a final list of 8 candidates for the 6 spots. My involvement is usually minimal. I review the files. I sign off. I trust Portia. Last June, Portia brought me the final 8 files. I was in my office on the 2nd floor of the lab, the one with the window that overlooks the American Tobacco campus and the old Lucky Strike smokestack. I was eating a sandwich I'd forgotten to eat 3 hours earlier and reading a paper on hydrogel crosslinking. She set the folders on my desk and said, "Strong group this year. 1 standout from UNC Chapel Hill, 2 from NC State, 1 from Spelman, 1 from Virginia Tech, and 1 from, actually, you should just look at them." She left. I opened the folders. The first 5 were excellent. Impressive transcripts. Research experience. Strong recommendation letters. Exactly what we look for. I made notes. I moved through them quickly. The 6th folder stopped me. Name, Naomi Coleman. University, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Major, biochemistry with a minor in biomedical engineering. GPA, 3.91. Research experience, 2 years in a lab studying wound healing mechanisms. Recommendation letters. Glowing, specific, the kind that are clearly written by professors who mean what they're saying, not just filling out a form. She'd published a co-authored paper as an undergraduate. She'd won a departmental award for research excellence. She was, on paper, one of the strongest applicants we'd had in 3 years. I almost moved past the name. Coleman is common. North Carolina is full of Colemans. But something made me flip to the back page. The emergency contact form. It's standard. We require it for all interns. Name of contact. Relationship. Phone number. Emergency contact. Patricia Coleman. Relationship. Mother. I set the folder down. I took off my reading glasses. I stared at the name for a long time. Patricia Coleman. Mrs. Coleman. AP Biology. 11th grade. Not everyone is meant for college. The formaldehyde. The fluorescent lights. The vinyl chair. The 2-hour cry on my bed in Kinston. Her daughter had applied to work in my lab. I want to be very precise about what I felt in that moment, because people always assume the wrong emotion. They assume satisfaction, revenge, some kind of cosmic gotcha moment where I leaned back in my chair and smiled at the ceiling. That's not what happened. What happened was grief. Sudden, sharp, unexpected grief. Not for myself. For the 17-year-old version of me who had walked out of that classroom believing that maybe the teacher was right, that maybe she wasn't enough, that maybe the road really was closed. I grieved for the 2 hours on the bed, for the tears that never fully dried, for the version of my life that could have happened if I'd listened. And then I felt something else, something quieter, something that felt like a question forming in the back of my mind. What kind of person do you want to be? I called Portia back in. The Coleman applicant, I said. She's strong. She's outstanding, Portia said. Top 3, easily. Her research background in wound healing is directly relevant to our scaffold work. And her professors say she's one of those rare students who actually thinks like a scientist, not just follows protocols. Her mother is Patricia Coleman. Portia blinked. Okay. Patricia Coleman was my 11th grade biology teacher. The one who told me I wasn't college material.
Portia sat down, slowly.
The way people sit when they realize they've walked into a room that's heavier than they expected. She'd been with me for 4 years. She knew the Kinston story. I told it once at a company offsite during a conversation about why I started Helion. I told it plainly, without drama, the way I tell most things. Portia had not said anything at the time. She just nodded. But she remembered. She remembered everything. Do you want me to remove her from the pool? She asked.
No.
Do you want to recuse yourself from the decision?
No.
Then what do you want to do? I want to evaluate her the same way I evaluate every other candidate. On her work, on her potential, on whether she can contribute to what we're building. Her mother told me I wasn't enough. I'm not going to turn around and tell her daughter the same thing. Naomi Coleman was offered a position in our summer internship program. She accepted. She started on June 10th. I didn't tell her who I was. I mean, she knew I was the founder and CEO. My name was on the wall. My photo was on the website. But she didn't know the history. She didn't know that her mother had once sat across from me in an empty classroom and gently, carefully, surgically removed my confidence and left it on the floor between us like a dissected frog nobody wanted to clean up. Naomi was good. Better than good. She was meticulous in the lab. She asked questions that showed she wasn't just memorizing procedures, but actually thinking about why each step mattered. On her third day, she flagged a potential contamination issue in one of our cell culture incubators that the full-time staff had missed. It turned out to be nothing, a false alarm from a sensor that needed recalibrating, but the fact that she noticed it, and more importantly that she spoke up about it, told me everything I needed to know about her instincts. She'd stay late to repeat an experiment if she wasn't satisfied with her technique. She kept a lab notebook that was so detailed Portia said it looked like it was written for publication. She had a quiet intensity that I recognized immediately because I'd spent my entire life carrying the same thing. The way she'd stand at the bench, focused, still, her eyes tracking a pipette tip with the concentration of someone who understood that precision isn't about being careful, it's about caring deeply enough to get it right. She was, in every way that mattered, exactly the kind of student Mrs. Coleman should have seen in me and chose not to. The irony was not lost on me. And I don't think it was lost on the universe either. One afternoon in July, about 5 weeks into the program, Naomi knocked on my office door. She was holding a draft of her internship research summary. She wanted my feedback before presenting it to the team. I invited her in. She sat in the chair across from my desk, the same position I'd been in 1,000 times on both sides, and she handed me the paper. It was good. Clean data. Clear methodology. A few formatting issues that were easily fixed. I made notes in the margins and handed it back. This is strong work, Naomi. Thank you, Dr. Achebe. She stood to leave. And then she stopped. She was in the doorway, half turned, one hand on the frame. The light from the hallway was behind her. Can I ask you something personal? She said. Sure. My mom teaches biology at Kinston High. She's been there for, 30 years. When I told her I got this internship, she looked you up.
She went really quiet. Then she said she taught you.
She said she remembers you. Naomi paused. She said she owed you an apology. The room was still. The hum of the lab equipment down the hall. The distant sound of someone pipetting in the tissue culture room. The late afternoon light cutting through the window blinds in gold stripes across my desk. She told me what she said to you. Naomi continued. About college. About the recommendation letter. She told me everything. She cried, Dr. Achebe. I've never seen my mother cry like that. She said she's thought about it for years. She said you were one of the hardest working students she ever had, and she made the worst mistake of her career. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let Naomi's words sit in the air the way words do when they carry more weight than the person saying them realizes. She wants to know if you'd be willing to talk to her, Naomi said. Not because she expects forgiveness. She just wants you to know that she knows. I took a breath. Tell your mom, I said, that I accept the apology. And tell her that the best thing she ever did for me was underestimate me, because it taught me something no biology class ever could. What's that? That the only person who gets to decide what you're meant for is you. Naomi nodded. She left. I sat in my office for a long time after that. The lab was closing down for the evening, lights turning off one by one, the building going quiet. I thought about Kinston, about the Camry, with a dead pine tree air freshener. About my mother and her scrub saying, "The person who tells you the road is closed has never seen you walk through walls." About Dr. Yao telling me my dissertation defense was the strongest in a decade. About the first patent and the second and the 12th. About the $67 million check that I'd photocopied and hung on my office wall not out of vanity, but as proof, physical, tangible proof, that a girl from Kinston who was told she wasn't college material could build something worth $210 million. I thought about Mrs. Coleman crying in her kitchen, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction, not vindication, compassion, because I know what it feels like to carry a mistake for 14 years. I know what it feels like to remember a moment where you caused damage and realize, too late, that you can't unfold the paper once it's been creased. She'd spent 14 years knowing she was wrong. That's its own kind of prison.
I didn't need to add to it.
2 weeks before the internship ended, I got a handwritten letter. Not an email. A letter on lined notebook paper, in handwriting that was neat but not steady, the handwriting of someone whose hand was shaking slightly as they wrote. It was from Mrs. Coleman. I won't share the whole letter. It was 3 pages. Some of it was deeply personal. Some of it was about her own insecurities as a teacher, how she'd grown up being told she wasn't smart enough, how she'd projected that onto students she didn't know how to reach, how she'd confused quietness with incapability, how she'd spent 30 years in a classroom and still made the mistake of judging a student's potential by how loudly they performed instead of how deeply they understood. One line stays with me. She wrote, "I have told 1,000 students they could be anything. You are the one I told couldn't. And you became the most extraordinary of all of them. That will follow me for the rest of my life. I am so sorry, Zora." I read the letter twice. I folded it and put it in my desk drawer, next to the photocopy of the Series B check and a picture of my mother in her garden in Kinston, holding a tomato so large she needed 2 hands. Naomi finished the internship at the end of August. She was exceptional. Portia and I offered her a guaranteed position after graduation. She accepted. She starts full-time in June. She'll be working on our newest scaffold design, a project I've been developing for 2 years that could change how burn victims recover. Her mother's daughter, working on healing. There's a symmetry in that I couldn't have written if I'd tried. Last month, I drove down to Kinston to visit my parents. It's about 2 hours from Durham on Highway 70. The same road I drove as a teenager. The same road my father took to work every morning for 25 years. The town looks the same. Smaller, maybe. Or maybe I just got bigger. I stopped at Kinston High School. I didn't go in. I parked in the lot and sat in my car, a Tesla Model 3 that still feels absurd to me every time I get in it because some part of my brain is still sitting in the Camry with the cracked dashboard. I looked at the building. The same brown brick. The same double doors. The same windows where the fluorescent lights still buzzed. Somewhere inside, Mrs. Coleman was probably teaching another class of 11th graders. Some of them were quiet. Some of them were loud. Some of them were being seen, and some of them weren't. I thought about going in, walking down the hall, knocking on her door, sitting in one of those vinyl-seated desks and saying, "It's me. The one you said wasn't meant for this." But I didn't. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't need to. The letter was enough. Naomi was enough. The lab was enough. The patents, the papers, the scaffold that might someday help a burn victim grow new skin over a wound that would have been permanent. All of it was enough. I didn't need Mrs. Coleman to see me. I'd spent 14 years seeing myself, and that was the whole point. I drove to my parents' house. My mother was in the garden. Tomatoes, as always. The Kinston summer heat sat on everything like a blanket. She looked up when I pulled in and waved with a glove still on, dirt falling from her fingers. My father was on the porch, reading a newspaper he still gets delivered, even though I've shown him how to use an iPad 6 times. Emeka was inside, on a video call with a friend, his voice carrying through the screen door. I sat on the porch with my father. He asked me about work. I told him about the new scaffold project. He nodded the way he always does, not fully understanding the science but understanding, deeply, that his daughter is building something important. He's never once told me what I meant for. He's never had to. He just showed up. Every day. For 31 years. My mother came up from the garden carrying 4 tomatoes and a handful of peppers. She set them on the porch railing and sat next to me. She smelled like dirt and lavender fabric softener, the same smell as every summer of my childhood.
"How's the lab?" she said. "Good."
"We're hiring Naomi full-time." "The Coleman girl?"
"Yeah."
My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You gave that girl a chance her mother never gave you." "I gave her a chance because she earned it." "That too. But the other thing is also true." She went inside to wash the tomatoes. The screen door closed behind her with that familiar slap. The porch leaned slightly to the right, the way it always has. The evening light was turning everything gold. And I sat there, 31 years old, 14 years removed from the worst afternoon of my life, and thought about all the quiet girls sitting in classrooms right now, being told what they aren't meant for by people who never took the time to see what they are.
Here's what I know.
You can't undo a sentence. You can unfold the paper. But you can take the crease and turn it into a compass line. You can let the place where someone tried to break you become the exact point where you start building. Mrs. Coleman told me the road was closed. My mother told me I walk through walls. They were both right about one thing. There's no shame in the path you take. The shame is in telling someone else their path doesn't exist.